When I first arrived in Hong Kong in 1965, the old airport at Kai Tak was still stuck in the middle of the city. I brought with me a family I'd met and known for a long time in Malaysia, Mokti bin Mat Sahid and his wife Sarah and their two sons, Masli and Maslam. We lived in those days in a rather large government quarter out at Silverstrand estate, a development which unfortunately has long disappeared. They were fairly spacious rooms and overlooked an amazing view of Port Shelter. I filled the walls with some of my paintings and the shelves with my books, and we set off to explore Hong Kong Island, Repulse Bay in this case, with our little Triumph Herald car, the little white one in the front. Silverstrand Estate, seen here at the top left, was surrounded by greenery and backed by terraced rice fields. That whole area was fairly undeveloped in those days, and the view, as I said earlier, from the balcony was quite staggering. We'd watch junks setting out to sea from Sai Kung, and little sampans sheltering in the coves, and sometimes a whole armada of junks would come trooping back after a night's fishing. On occasion, the red flag would be hoisted to indicate that the Royal Air Force, with their Hawker hunters, were going to use Target Island as for shooting practice. You can see the two little roundels on the top. But at sunrise, when there wasn't any shooting practice, it was beautiful. We went to visit Norman Butler out at his flat in the old Sha Tin area, and we entertained. Opposite us lived Beppo Del Marda, a magistrate who occupied a beautiful home called Casa Branca from a very old Portuguese family. By this time I'd acquired the very first Honda motor car that had been imported into Hong Kong, 350cc engine, and I bought only the second one ever to be imported. Beppo, second from the left here, was an admirable host. I helped him build a swimming pool in his garden overlooking that lovely bay. And the family would frequently join me out there for swimming afternoons. You can see Silverstrand Estate at the top left. The kids started to go to Rosary Hill School in Kowloon, and we would go exploring the new territories, starting with this old walled village near Sha Tin. Which still exists, although now surrounded by high-rises. Sai Kung itself was still fairly undeveloped in those days. On occasion we'd organize little fishing excursions, hiring a local sampan and going out onto the waters of Port Shelter with our Malay friend Yusuf. The old Hoklo fisherman was a good friend of ours, and he knew where the best fishing grounds were. We'd also explore Plover Cove in the days when it was still an inlet of the sea, and they were about to turn it into a reservoir, so Mokti and I went scavenging in the villages that had already been deserted. All of that was now long submerged under the new reservoir. Birthdays were celebrated with birthday cakes, and the kids grew to enjoy holidays like Christmas, which of course they'd never known back in the lair. One of our friends was John Howes, the architect who designed the Mandarin Hotel. We'd visit him out at his beautiful home overlooking the Sha Tin Valley, which in those days was covered with vegetable farms. Now, of course, a sea of high-rises. We'd watch the old Kowloon Canton Railway chugging out of its tunnel. John employed Chinese stonemasons to build this beautiful home in traditional Chinese village style. Among our friends from Shaw Studios was actor Jin Shamsuddin, who would accompany us on some of our excursions into the new territories. Much younger then, of course, as we all were. Mokti enjoyed building kites, and he built one in our drawing room for the boys, although he was far more interested in flying it than they were. It was a typical Malay kite of enormous span. In the early spring months, Port Shelter would be covered with mist, giving it a strange, surreal quality. Some of our best excursions were out to Castle Peak, which in those days was still building junks and still a bay. And beyond that, of course, in Yuen Long were the fish farms, where the Mai Po marshes now are. All a very long time ago.